this described my mother perfectly. So, Idinge, after her name, means that she's deceased. My father was Frank Sansusi. Shonge Hizi, yellow horse, and he too is deceased. And then I ended by saying, I'm an Omaha woman. So in that way, what that introduction does, it lets you know exactly who I am. And if there are Omaha relatives in here, like my Uncle Rudy sitting there, my brother John Papan, I don't know who else, I got to put my glasses on so I can see. But, oh, yes, and Tammy over there. So that lets them know how they're related to me. If they didn't know me, but they do know me actually. But if they didn't know me, then they could place me and say, oh, she named her parents, so I know who they are. Okay, then they can understand and say, this is how I'm related to her. So then, if they weren't, there are non-Omahas in here, as we'd say, then the Native people would try to determine how they're related to me again, because they may be from a different tribe. But again, they're going to go, okay, she comes from that family. What do we know about them? And that's what they'll discuss. Like, oh, her family sings, because all my brothers sing. I sing. So they might say, okay, that's what they do. And then they'll say, oh, is it one of our relatives married into that tribe? And then they'll determine, like, okay, we might be related to her this way because there's some kind of relationship there. But it goes on and on and on. But really what that introduction is about is all about relationship. And then if you were not native and you were non-native, and then you may say, okay, she's Omaha. Wow, where are the Omaha people from? And you may, if you have an idea, if you're familiar with our traditional territories, then you'll have an idea where you could say, oh, I know where she comes from. So that introduction does that for people. It gives everyone exactly an idea of how they're related to me or how I'm connected to the land. So here we are tonight. In Omaha, we say, Vatite udon. It's good you're here. Welcome. And I always say, welcome to Omaha country. You're in the city of Omaha. This is our traditional territories. Our ancestors are buried here at Fontanelle Forest, Chief Big Elk. This is very important that we all gather here this evening just for this small dinner, before we begin tomorrow. So in this past year or so, I've been serving as the chairperson for our planning committee to, engage and to begin to invite relatives to come here, either to present or to come and listen. And in this case, well, the ones who are here tonight, you're all here for a reason. And tonight what we have in place is, well, we have our 2 keynote speakers, and we will go into that after, I think, I do the prayer, and then we're going to eat, and then we'll have our speakers. And after, we will also have a presentation or performance, as you could say, by danzantes, Mexica danzantes. And this is something that's, I feel is it really touches my heart to have them here. And I will share a story at some point when, after they dance or before they dance, however, we'll figure out that flow here. But I wanted to say, everybody that's here, I'm really glad to see you, from my heart. Weyweytera, thank you for coming. So with that, I'll begin our prayer. In my hands, I hold 2 medicines. One is sage, and the other is water. And this way, the blessing will be given in this way for everybody, but also to bless our waters. Wakonda, Weyblaha, Creator, thank you. Idado, Gluba, Udashkache. Everything you do is good. Shinga Jingama, Wahubeyaka. Our children are sacred. Ni Wahubeyaka. Our water is sacred. Moko Wahubeyaka. Our medicines are sacred. All our people on this land are sacred, who are part of Omaha territory, as well as all our visitors. Wakonda, I ask for a prayer, a blessing for everybody who is here this evening and for the ones who are still coming, that are traveling to be here. Please give a blessing for protection, a blessing of good health, a blessing of happiness. And I thank you so much. Pray for all our families and everybody whose family has been left at their homes. And I pray that everybody's homes will be in a good way, that when they return, everything will be good. Thank you so much for these blessings. And I thank you for my family. My blessings are for our home. Thank you so much. Again, Weyblaha. Everything is good. Idado, Gluba, Udashkake. Everything you do is good. Wakonda, Wadaho, Weyblaha. Ewede wongide. Weyblaha, thank you so much. And with that, I think we should begin. Everybody's ready over there? All right. So the meal is ready. In our way, we always say elders first. So please, elders, please help yourself as we're going through the line, and then everyone else follow suit. But if there are any children here, I don't know. I don't see any little ones. So please begin. Let's commence. Weyblaha, Ewede wongide.
In those states. So you can see that wide area in brown that indicates where we had lived at certain points in time. And then in that tiny little map, that tiny little brown spot, that's the corner of Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, that's our current reservation. We have about 12,000 or so acres that make up our reservation, only 6,000 of which we actually own. The rest of the reservation is in private land ownership. But you can see this is a very important area for so many reasons. We had so many ancestral trade routes up and down the Missouri River. We traded with indigenous nations, we traded with French fur traders, we had a robust economy long before folks showed up from Europe on our lands. So we are taking that and we are reinvigorating it. We have a robust vision for how we want to grow our economy and how we want to work together with people, particularly indigenous people from all across the globe. I will point out there's a few handouts on every table. If someone doesn't have one of the handouts and you want one, we can pull them off other tables, and I have some extras here. So if you want one, just let me know. We'll get you a handout. But one of the first ways we're diversifying our economy and really trying to bring in new partners is a trade hub. So this trade hub will really be very near our reservation, but kind of at that confluence where the Missouri River meets Kansas, meets Nebraska, and meets Missouri. This is where historically we have traded for many, many years. Well, eventually the federal government saw the value of this location and decided to move us from that location. So we went ahead and bought land. We paid for it and we took some of it back so we could start building that trade route. We'll have access to to the Missouri River, so we can actually move goods, indigenous goods, by barge. We'll have access to one of the biggest rail yards, one of the biggest rail lines in the world in Kansas City. Of course, it probably is not as big as Omaha. I'm just guessing because I've heard Omaha is kind of owned by Union Pacific. But we do have a huge rail yard in Kansas City we have easy access to. And on top of that, we'll have access to the Kansas City International Airport. So we can move products by air, by water, or by land. So one of the ways we're starting our hub is through a foreign trade zone. So that is one of the handouts, is kind of the basics on a foreign trade zone, but that is going to be the foundation for our trade hub. So this foreign trade zone will allow us to bring in products from all across the world into this trade zone, do some manufacturing, create some jobs, and then put it out into the world, put it out into the ecosystem. It works really well. It's a great model for everyone to benefit a little bit, because the folks moving products into the United States gets to reduce their tax burden through tariffs. And then we will get to create jobs with some light manufacturing. And then we'll get to tap into our logistics center to get those goods out. So any indigenous people, we've already started having some conversations with a number of indigenous people, particularly in Australia and New Zealand and all across the world, where we want to bring in those goods. And we want to bring in those goods and reduce their tax burden. So we would love to partner with indigenous nations all across the world. And this foreign trade zone is just the first step. We are planning on having a laydown yard, which is kind of the most basic version of a foreign trade zone. But this, you'll see, is our vision, where we want to, over the next few years, build out multiple services so we can help support our indigenous and native partners from all across the world. So we start with the laydown yard. Then we work on distribution, cold storage, processing, all the way to what we're calling a food supply chain organization, or essentially a whole solution to changing the food system. I think the most basic way of saying it is, we want to be the indigenous U.S. foods. We want indigenous people to have access to the same markets as the folks that go through U.S. Foods have. We want to create all of these revenue streams with sustainably grown, nutritious foods using our traditional knowledge that we know we're not going to get the same prices if we go to a white-led organization. So that's what we want to do, is we want to build out our own food system to meet our needs, but also expand beyond our communities to the entire world. We can't do that alone. I already shared, we have 6,000 acres that we own. There is no way we could create an entirely new food system all by ourselves. So we would love to create mutually beneficial partnerships with indigenous people. We want it to work for everyone. We want to grow the economies of nations, of indigenous nations, native businesses, native-owned businesses, and indigenous people all around. We can't do this alone. We would love to build partnerships. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today, in addition to just having this incredible atmosphere of being able to share and learn from you all. So I'm going to bring your attention to one piece of paper that's on your tables, and it's the Indigenous Peoples Commitment to Relations and Trade. This is something that I helped write in partnership with a number of other people. But you'll notice the title is A Commitment to Relations and Trade. Because I know, at least with my tribe, we start with building relationships. We don't start with transactions. We start with knowing people, building trust, getting to know them. So we want to have strong, solid relationships first, And then we truly believe that trade or transactions will naturally occur as a result of that. So that's why we have developed this commitment to relations and trade the way it is. You'll see a few things. At the heart of this commitment, of course, we want to develop relationships, increase trade, but we have a few things that I think we just want to put out into the world. This is what we believe. We believe not only in building our economies, but living in harmony with the land, the seas, the water, the skies, the animals, and the people. Caring for our communities, from our children to our elders. And not just now, but for many, many years into the future. Valuing and respecting cultural integrity and authenticity. Promoting economic independence from the governments that have and are continuing to threaten our sovereignty and the well-being of our people. And creating and sharing business opportunities that will create lasting change through building intergenerational wealth, pride, and empowerment. So it is not just about wealth, but pride and empowerment for all Indigenous people is just as, if not more important. So the other thing I'll say is we want to act in accordance with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And we want to use that as the foundation for what we do and how we build our partnerships and how we do business and build relationships. So with this piece of paper, I would love for you to look at it, dissect it, think about it. Think about if there's anything missing, if there's anything that really speaks to you. Feel free to share it. I have it in an electronic format too if you'd like me to email it to you. Feel free to take a picture if you want to send it on to any council, any decision makers, any Indigenous businesses, Indigenous people that you know. Have them look at it too. Take the next couple days to think about it. I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be here Thursday. If you have any questions, any thoughts, pull me aside. Let's have a chat. Let's talk about it. And then I hope if everyone is supportive, if anyone is supportive, we can have a few different people potentially consider signing a commitment to trade, not just with the Iowa tribe, but amongst all of our nation, amongst all of our people. So think about this and see if you would feel comfortable on Thursday making a commitment, taking a leap to build a relationship. Again, this is not about just jumping straight into trade. It's about a commitment on how we build a strong, robust relationship and a foundation for us to continuing to work together. So I will now say if anyone has questions, I would be glad to answer them. If y'all would like to continue eating, that's also okay. And if anyone needs any handouts, feel free to raise your hand. I'll run some extras over to you as soon as I'm done. Yes, I can absolutely share my email. I'll also say this is my cell phone number on the screen, so you can text me, you can call me, you can email me, you can do all of that. Okay, thank you all so much. Enjoy your dinner, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you over the next few days.
Thank you so much, Missty. You know, that was really important information. And again, I feel like we're in a time when we're seeing all our tribal peoples coming together and reestablishing these trade routes, because it's not just going to be like just in the United States, as you know, people here on this part of the land would see it that way. But we're now building upon that and looking at everything across Turtle Island, but now throughout the world. So again, thank you so much. You know, that was really, really, I feel beneficial. That's taking those next steps in tribal sovereignty. So with that, our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Cornell. I'm going to read his bio here. He is a political and cultural sociologist with substantive interests in Indigenous self-determination, self-government, and development. and in processes of ethnic and racial group formation. In recent years, his work has focused on assertions and enactments of self-governing power by Native nations in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and on related policy issues. This work has included extensive collaborative research and consultation with Native nations, communities, and organizations in all 4 countries. Dr. Cornell retired from the University of Arizona in March of 2018, but continues research in these areas. He is our keynote this evening as well, and is also going to be a panelist. So thank you. Give him a warm welcome, Dr. Stephen Cornell.
Thank you very much. And I just want to acknowledge the privilege of being in the territory of the Umonhon Nation, and thank you for this evening's welcome to us and your opening prayer. It's a pleasure to be here and to be on your territory. Luis Marcos asked me to say a few words tonight, and I must say I've wrestled with what exactly to talk about. But for one thing, I love this story that Missty just shared with us. I think there's a story being written right here in Omaha. It's been going on for a little while now, coming out of the Maya community here. And these stories, the story that is being written here now by this community, the story that Missty told, these other stories, this is the necessary nourishment for an indigenous renaissance and revolution that's happening in many parts of the world today. Telling these stories and changing the attitude out there that many communities suffer from, that it's not going to change. I once had a very prominent chief of a First Nation in the southern part of what's now Alberta, the Xicana Nation. They're part of the Blackfeet Confederacy. His name was Slater. He said, part of my problem in my community is that our people think of themselves as victims. Look what Canada did to us. He said, I think we're victors. Look what Canada did to us, and we're still here, and we're still Xicana, and we will be ourselves. We're victors. And I think the sorts of stories we just heard, and I'm going to tell you far more briefly a few others that I'll just try to capture in capsule form. Those kinds of stories change not only for someone like Slater Crowfoot and the Xicana Nation in Alberta, not only change the mentality of his own people, they change the mentality of people like me. I'm not an indigenous person. I'm a non-native. I'm a settler scholar. But if you read the newspapers and listen to the dialogue about indigenous peoples that goes on in this country, in Canada, in Australia, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, those are the 4 countries I've worked in the most, it's a story of disadvantage and deficit and disaster and so forth. It's this story of failure. But these stories are stories of success and resourcefulness and innovation and imagination and accomplishment, and those are the stories that we need to be telling. Because that renaissance, that revolution is happening around the world, and it involves, well, I'll back up a little bit and just give you a quick capsule. Back in the 1980s, I was a young assistant professor in the sociology department at Harvard University, and an economist and I started something called the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. It was a project that was based on a simple observation, which was that some nations in the United States, some indigenous nations, were being successful at pursuing their own goals, whatever those goals might be. In some cases, those goals were land consolidation. They might be legal defense. They could be economic development. It could be educating your children in your own culture instead of in the colonial culture. Some nations were being successful at doing that, and others seemed to be spinning their wheels, and we were interested in what's the difference. Could we talk to people in those nations and find out what differentiates between those who are changing things and realizing their goals and those who seem frustrated? And a few things emerged very strongly out of that research. And the first thing was the indigenous nations who were successful at pursuing their goals were calling the shots themselves. They were in the driver's seat. They weren't doing what Washington said to do. They were doing what they felt they should do. They were pursuing their agenda in their own ways. It was a self-determination finding. What it basically said was, if you want culturally, economically, politically prosperous indigenous communities, turn them loose. Let them be themselves. Let them exercise power. And the second finding was that it turned out to be important that indigenous nations, we found the more successful ones, had a vision of what they were trying to do. And that vision often, many of them were engaged in economic activity, but it turned out not necessarily to be about profits. It was about what you could do with profits. It was about how you could invest in your elders, how you could take better care of your children, how you could do some of the things Missty just talked about because you had the wherewithal and you didn't have to go hat in hand to Washington and ask for money. I once had a tribal leader in the United States say to me, "Economic development is my freedom program." I said, what do you mean by that? He said, the US will never pay us enough money to make up for what they took from us, the land, etc., our children even. But he said, in my experience, every federal dollar is a leash around my neck, and I want to escape the leash. That's why we pursue economic development. Then we don't have to ask permission, we don't have to report, it's ours. But you need that vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish. So the first finding was you have to be in the driver's seat. The second one was you need to know what it is you're trying to do. There's a Maori leader, very eminent indigenous leader in the country of New Zealand. He said, are we just trying to be rich white people with a suntan? Or is our purpose the intergenerational transmission of identity and heritage? And if that's our purpose, let's have it shape all our decisions. Every decision, that's what we think about. I thought it was a very interesting way to put it. Third finding was, okay, you've got to back up authority. If you're going to claim decision-making power, then you have to back it up with competence. You have to be able to govern well. You have to be able to choose strategic goals and mobilize a community behind them. You've got to be able to resolve conflicts within a community. All communities have disputes and conflicts. The challenge is to prevent them from tearing you to pieces. So you have to have a governing system that works in service of your goals. That was the third finding. And the fourth one was that governing system should meet your cultural criteria, not someone else's. My country, the United States, we go around the world often telling people, you need better governing. In fact, what you need is our governing institutions because they're really cool. No, what people need is governing institutions that reflect their own people's belief about how authority and responsibility should be organized and exercised. Because when they believe that the government is a representation of who they are, then they support it. Then it's not something you try to rip off. It's something that you support and invest time and energy in. And we called that cultural match, that your governing institutions have to match the ideas within your community of how you appropriately should be organizing. And that meant governments look very different. I don't know very much about exactly how Misty's government is organized, but I can tell you that there'll be others around the United States that will look very different from that, because they're different nations with different traditions and different cultures, and if they're free to build the government they want, it will be an expression of those differences. And finally, we discovered that you really need a very public-spirited kind of leadership to be successful. And luckily, a lot of nations have long traditions of public-spirited leadership, and those traditions are being brought back and coming alive. And this approach that we felt came out of the research, we didn't invent it, we felt we learned it from indigenous nations who are being successful. We called that nation rebuilding. Nation building, or nation, as Oren Lyons from Onondaga would say, nation rebuilding. We're not newly built, we were here. Nation rebuilding. And we called it a nation rebuilding model, and it's produced, we learned this from nations who were doing interesting things. And what were they doing? Well, they were building their own governments. They were discarding the government that the United States said, well, if you want to govern yourselves, you got to do it this way by our tools. And instead they were saying, no, we're going to do it our way. So they were building governments. They were building economies. They were beginning to think about, well, what sort of economic activity resonates with us? They were making citizens. They were engaging in education of their people to say, well, where are the young men and women who 20 years from now are going to be leaders? And are we investing in them? Are we investing in their knowledge of their culture? Are we investing in their knowledge of that world out there that they're going to have to deal with? And the results of what these things that we saw, the nations we were talking to and listening to, this is where these stories matter. And I could spend far too much time telling you some of the stories that struck us and that became the kind of thing that we spent time trying to understand. How did you do that? The Umatilla tribe up in the Northwest being responsible for the recovery of salmon in the Umatilla River. It wasn't done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, it was done by the Umatilla. The Navajo Nation court system, which takes old Navajo peacemaking techniques and uses them to resolve disputes in the contemporary immediate world. It's a court of substantial civil jurisdiction and significant criminal jurisdiction. It processes thousands of cases a year. It's a very large nation. And the first Chief Justice of that court, Tom So, said, we built a court that looks Western because we thought if we did that, then the U.S. government wouldn't interfere with us. But if you're in our court, you'll be dealing with Navajo law. The structure is Western, but the law, he said, is ours. And that law goes way back, in many cases, to things that were brought to the Navajo by the holy beings long, long ago as the secrets of a good life. The Swinomish tribe in Washington State, they license their own dental technicians now. A statement of their sovereignty. We're an indigenous nation. We've got an oral health care problem. We can't get enough people. All right, we'll train our own. And Washington State said, no, we control who gets to be a dentist. And they said, no, we're a sovereign nation. We'll put together our own licensing. And they made it first class and did it. Muskogee Creek in Oklahoma, who have a wonderful program to reintegrate people coming out of the criminal justice system, coming out of prison, often carrying enormous burdens for the things they did, for what they suffered in prison and so forth, and the Creeks knowing that there's so much talent, our people are incarcerated at a high rate. How do we bring them back into the community and help them be responsible Muskogee Creeks again? So they have a creative program that does that. It's one of the most impressive reintegration programs anywhere in the country. Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Reservation in Montana have a big forestry resource. They do a better job of managing a forest for sustained yield than the U.S. Forest Service does. They do it better. And they manage it not just for sustained yield, but to support the cultural things that matter to them as well. So it's not simply a forest to be cut, it's a forest to be lived with. The Nez Perce tribe, when the state of Idaho rejected the idea of bringing gray wolves back to a wilderness from which they were extinguished long ago, and Idaho refused to partner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife for gray wolf recovery, the Nez Perce stepped up and said, we'll lead the recovery effort. The wolf is a relative of ours. We were displaced and so was the wolf. We want to bring that voice back to the land. Within 5 years, under Nez Perce tribal management, Idaho had enough breeding wolf pairs to sustain a wolf population. Again, these are the stories of what's happening out there and the stories that we need to be telling. I think there's a story being written here, and it's got a new wrinkle in it. Here's the Maya community, an immigrant community, an indigenous community with connections to another hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, to Central America and beyond. And they're engaging in nation building. And they're doing so in partnership with the Umonhon Nation, with the Iowa tribe in trade. This is the kind of not just storytelling, but connection making that needs to be made if this renaissance and revolution on the part of indigenous peoples around the world is going to succeed. And I think that story is what's being written here over these next few days, but over the last couple of years and over the coming years right here in Omaha. And it's an important story, and I think it's going to be a significant one. It's an illustration of what could happen with indigenous peoples across international boundaries. This network we're beginning to see emerge of international indigenous innovation. That network is important. And one thing we need to remember is that these kinds of things don't just benefit indigenous peoples. When the salmon come back to the Umatilla River, it's not just the Umatilla who benefit. Everybody who has an interest in salmon because they eat it or they depend on it or they fish for it or whatever, they have a debt to the Umatilla Nation. When you are successful, you spin off benefits to people around you. When we got in the middle of a lot of this research from the Harvard project, we said to the US government, it is in your interest to have indigenous nations that are empowered and successful. It will save you money in the long run. You know, poverty is really expensive for central governments. It'll save the US government money in the long run, and it will produce benefits well beyond indigenous people. So the stories that we're heard already tonight and the ones I've just mentioned, these are stories not just that look toward benefit for indigenous nations. These are the sorts of stories that in these difficult times we're in, the things happening in the natural world around us and in the world around us, these are the stories that we need to hear because we stand to benefit from them. So thank you very much for letting me speak with you this evening and inviting me here to this conference. Thank you.
As the danzantes are preparing themselves, I just wanted to share something. In all the travels I've undertaken throughout my life, one of the things I think when I recall being a little girl, like, you know, like these little ones here in front of us, my mom always had a hard time keeping me indoors or keeping me, you know, under close watch. So the minute she turned her back, I'd always be out the door and I'd be running down the street, right? And so then she'd have to go and run after me. And I didn't understand for the longest time why I wanted to do that. I always had to go out and be out, either outside or I had to go and explore. And I think as I grew up and, you know, came of age where I could travel, I did so. And people thought, you know, at times that they said, where do you go and why do you do that? You know, I said, I don't know. I just want to go and see what the world is like. And I make friends and relatives everywhere I go. So it doesn't matter where I go. I always have a place to stay. I've always been fortunate in that way that people took good care of me. So, and that's continued throughout my lifetime. People are always welcoming and taking good care of me and my family if we travel to those parts that we've never been to. So in return, I always consider that if somebody comes here to our homelands or they're visiting for any reason, then we do that same thing. We do our best to treat them well, to make sure they have what they need, and to provide, what they require at that time, which may be shelter. Our people were never stagnant. We were not static people. We were never meant to be static people. Everything that happened to us after colonization affected our way of relating to one another. So I keep that in mind, that I understand now. My grandfather, Edward Fremont Ithinge, he was a World War II veteran, and he traveled all over the world. So again, when I was a little girl, he would explain to me, this is where I'd been, and he'd point to a world map. And so again, I told my mom, I'm going to go to those same places that Grandpa went to, to Europe. And so I have been through Europe. I have traveled in that way, but I haven't been down under. My grandfather also went to Australia and New Zealand, was based down there, and to Japan. So those are areas I haven't been to yet. So I'm still alive, and I hope to live into the fourth hill, as we say, fourth hill of life. So I want to continue these travels. But what my message is about is really about relationship again. We were never separate people. We always traded. We always traveled. We traded with our relatives to the south, as we always say. People of Mexico, Central America, South America. We were no strangers to them, nor were they to us. We were no strangers to people of the north, nor were they to us. And we know that archaeologists always say that. We don't know how they got these things, but they have something that came from way down south. And we're like, of course we know, because we were trading. Idiots, That's my view. But, in that trade process, those relationships again, when we were separated by these borders, that dealt us a severe blow in our trade relationships and in our relationships, period. So that we look at people to the south as being, what, immigrants? Foreigners? And I'm always like, I don't think so. They were here just as long as we have. I mean, we're all related. We were all of this continent. They're just like us, same color as me, look kind of like me. And I can say the same thing as what I've heard a lot of my southern relatives say, that they're mestizo because of the conquistadors, right? Well, I'm a mestizo too. I don't deny that one bit. On my father's side are the French fur traders. On my mother's side are the Spanish fur traders. I never denied any of that. And I do understand how that impacted our tribes, but also to a family like myself. I always say that to people. You can't have a name like mine, Renee sans Souci. How much more French can you get? So, I don't deny those. I always claim that. Yes, I'm a Métis. I'm a mestizo. But like our relatives to the south who have gone through similar instances, issues, treatment, on and on, as we have here, displacement, language loss, spirituality and ceremonial loss, on and on, land loss, you name it. We've all experienced it. So I say that because our relatives who are going to be here dancing, I'm going to well, I'm going to attempt to dance with them. And I say that again because years ago, again when I was much younger, and this is about 16, 17 years ago, for whatever reason, everything that had happened in my life, I became an Mexica Aztec dancer, danzante. And I couldn't for the life of me understand, why they wanted me to dance with them. And I was like, okay, I will dance. And again, I was scared because I was like in my mid-40s at the time. I was still pretty spry, really active, but I couldn't do all those fantastic things that I saw all the danzantes do, right? All those kicks and twirling and everything. I did my best though, but I learned so much. The one thing I learned, we had a ceremonia. This was in Minneapolis. It was a water ceremony. And it was in the middle of a ball field. And there was the lake that was, nearby where the ceremony was, the offerings were going to be made. But in that ceremonia, they had constructed a pyramid made out of particle board and so forth, and had it painted all the colors. And at that time, I was also learning about where the Omaha people had been and what we had done and believed and practiced. And I had learned about that time that we too were pyramid builders. We were mountain building people. We built pyramids just as the people to the south. So to me, I was dancing, right, in this ceremonia. And as we danced to that pyramid, in my DNA, I knew it was, what do you call that, recognition? That this wasn't, I was familiar with this. I could see it. And I started to cry. And I thought, wow, this goes way back hundreds of years to what my Umonhon ancestors had done. And it was a powerful thing for me to understand and see and realize that in that relationship, then we had very similar ways, practices, beliefs. I will not deny that. So again, in welcoming our danzantes here, I'm so glad again, like I said, that they're here. I've always wanted to have danzantes come here to Nebraska. I mean, I know that there have been other danzantes that have been here, but not specifically for something like this. This is the Indigenous Peoples Summit. They are indigenous just as we are here. And so let's welcome them. I want to call them up and they can speak. I know they have a mic as well and introduce themselves and so forth. So please give them a warm welcome. Weyweytera.
Hello. Good evening. Buenas tardes a todos. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a blessing to be here. We have traveled from Philadelphia, and we have met beautiful people, even from our own Danza family. We have one of our sisters from Texas joining us today, and then we have our sister Renee, who, in memory of her childhood and years when she participated, now she wants to retouch and place oneself in this heart of danza. So we would like to invite you to please stay with us through this prayer. This is for all of us, for the healing of our people, for the healing of our descendants, for the healing of our nation as well. We're going to salute the four points of the universe. We're going to lift our hands every time we move to the different directions. I appreciate that. Thank you. Now we salute to the west. We lift our hands in spirit to salute the spirit of the west, the place where the sun sets, the place that reminds us of our heart, the place that reminds us that the red is the red, the color of the blood, the color of our emotions. En Espancinco en Weyweytera, en Espancinco en Tonatu Temoa, Ehekatl Tlali Atotonali. We now turn to the north. We lift our hands in spirit to salute our ancestors, our grandmothers and grandparents, those that were before than us in this plane. We give thanks for all the memories, for all the legacy, for the DNA that runs in our blood that reminds us that we are from somewhere, from every corner of the universe, where indigenous peoples were the first settlers and the first people of this world. Koshi, Ehekatl Tlali Atotonali. And now as we move to the south, we salute the spirit of the wind of the south, represented by the hummingbird, the strength of the humankind. And now we salute our father's sons, the giver of life. And the cosmovision of the Anahuaca people, the sun represents the fertilizer of the earth. It represents the big serpent, the serpent that symbolizes the wiseness. It symbolizes the intelligence of the human being. And lastly but not least, we're going to salute Mother Earth because she has been grateful to us, because we have received food, shelter, and care. Thank you. Can sit down now. Thank you for sharing in this space and the energy of our salute to the four corners of the universe. Now we're going to perform, we're going to do a dance, what we call danza in Spanish. Vamos a hacer las danzas que son nuestros rezos en movimiento. We're going to do our prayers that are in movement that represents the movement of the heart as well. So please observe, we are going to be representing the same things that you guys have observed in nature, the elements, the animals, our companions, the other spirits that surround us. Thank you. The dance you just watched us perform is called Deer Venado. If you observe, the movement of the venado were very playful, jumpful, right? Jumping up and down, moving from one side to the other. And that reminds us of the energy of all these little brothers and sisters that comes with a very fragile and delicate energy. And that's what the message is for all of us today. Sometimes we want to direct things in life in a very harsh and very strong way. And sometimes it might be a possibility to go softly, to go swiftly with the heart, with the words that appeal the heart instead of those that demand an action. This is the time for us to move and strengthen ourselves from the heart to the outside. Weyweytera. Thank you. Anybody can guess which dance was that? Was it from any element that you're familiar with? When we salute to the ground, we salute the Mother Earth. Woo! Cheers for that. Yes. We salute the Mother Earth because right in this summit, there are a lot of finalists and presenters that are talking about farms, cultivating the earth, growing the crops to learn and have a farm at home, in the community, for the community. So this is our first work we need to do with our children. Teach them where the food is coming from. It doesn't come from the supermarket, right? Somebody put it in the supermarket. There were people working in the field to make the crops grow, water it, and along
With that, there has to be the energy of the universe that is blessing it with the water, with the wind, and the rain, right? Thank you very much. Those are our prayers for Mother Earth. Thank you very much. Whew. That was the dance of fire. You could see it, right? It was bursting and burning. Fire across all nations, tribes, in all the planet, in the world. Fire is a very unique element because it's able to transform and to disintegrate things, right? You put a piece of beef on the stove, it will turn out something that you can eat. If you put a bad thought, a bad emotion into it, psst, it burns. That's the medicine of fire, that it burns. As long as you know how to keep abreast of it, you will know how to navigate and work with it. The women in the cosmovision of the Anahuaca people carry the fire. And the fire not only represents the internal fire of the individual, but it represents the fire of the community, the heart. And this heart, it always has to be a heart of service to others, a heart that is there to sustain the needs of others, a heart that is there to have a big flame when everything else is down. So the heart of the fire is you. You have the essence. Every time your heart goes, that's the energy of fire. And that's the prayer for us today. Thank you. In our last dance, before we close, the same way we open this sacred space, is with the dance called corn, maíz. Because maíz has been the first element sustainer of life for all the creatures in the planet. For all the inhabitants of this planet, from planet and Mother Earth, we have had the corn that has been grateful to us, faithful. And we are also grateful to have had it from millennials, for many years ago, from the time of our ancestors domesticated the corn and then became big fields of corn that we now see in the stores, as you can see in the supermarkets, the big corns, hushes of corn. That's where it's coming from the center of the earth, from the labor of the people, women and men that have been able to work the land. And this is a tribute to all the seeds of corn that sit in this room. This is the dance of the corn. Yes. Thank you, Tlazokamati. That is a very powerful dance because it represents one of the sustainers in our food chain. And we're grateful because we can now eat tortillas. And we are glad because we can eat corn in the cob. We are glad because for centuries, the same style that we are representing in our dances through our steps is the one that is being used by our ancestors until present time in our indigenous communities. Yeah. First we opened the ground. Now they brought the horse and all that, but it used to be with your own foot. You open a hole on the earth and put the seed to the right and to the left until it grows and became a hilote, right? The young corn. And then came the wind and blew around the corn, right? And then when it was time, plus the water that came up and down, the corn became ready to be harvested. And we were doing the harvest all around, opening the ground to get it out of the soil. And lastly, it came to our tables. When came the agricultures, all the peasants in the farms pick it up from the ground and brought it to your table. These are the memories of the ancestors of the Anahuac land. Thank you very much. As we prepare for closing, we would like to invite you once again to get up from your seat and share with us this space and time to give thanks for this moment that have taken place in your hearts and ours. We are Campatlanesi from Philadelphia, and also Olin Ehekatl Papalotzin from Texas, and our sister Renee, sharing these blessings, these prayers, and our prayers in moment with you. Let's get up. We give thanks to the spirit of the east where the sun comes up in the morning, the first ray of light. Ehekatl totonali. Now we move to the west, we salute the west. We lift our hands in spirit to salute the spirit of the west, giving thanks for the energy that has been given to form the circle and offer this prayer to the sun that sets in the afternoon. En Tlazokamati senka Tlazokamati lilia mekin weishipetote atehekatl tlali atotonali. And now we face the north. We give thanks to the spirit of the north, the spirit of our ancestors, of our grandmothers and grandparents, those that have left the legacy of continuing spreading the seed across the nations, across the globe, with our children and the children of our children. Senka Tlazokamati, Weyweytonati temoa, atehekatl tlali atotonali. Now we salute the spirit of the south. We lift our hands in spirit to give thanks to the spirit of the south, the spirit that reminds us of the humankind, of the human will and the human strength. Because we get up from where we are, wherever we need help, and whenever we need to support ourselves to lift our souls in spirit. Agradecemos al Espíritu de la fuerza de voluntad que nos levanta cada vez que nos caemos para tener más fuerza para confiar en nosotros. center to salute the sun. We give thanks to the master of the earth. Without the sun, we wouldn't have the food on our table. Without the sun, we wouldn't be living organisms. So we give thanks to the spirit of the sun because it has been good to us, fertilizing the earth, giving us the energy and all the rays that our body needs to survive on this plane. Ehekatl And now we kneel down to touch the earth. We give thanks to Mother Earth for all the fruits, for the shelter, for the kindness of having us and caressing us with his grass, with the flowers, with all the forest, with the rivers and mountains that provide water, with the animals that are our companions and the spirit brothers that are with us walking on this earth. Saludamos con amor para despedir a nuestra Madre Tierra Tonantzin, que nos da el abijo, el cobijo y el abrigo, nos brinda los frutos de su vientre y nos recuerda que todos somos gente de la tierra. Ehekatl tlali atotonali. Mexicatawi! Thank you very much. Thank you.
Relatives, Weyweytera. So as you see, our relatives from the south gave a blessing here. And in closing, what I'd like to share very quickly is that, again, like I said, I didn't know why I was called to the danza at the time. But one time we were having a ceremonia. And as I was coming into the circle, and they had the Sahumadora at the opening of the circle, who was smudging everybody off with the copal. What this elder said to me, this woman, she said, "You're from here." You know, she meant here in this part of the world. And I said, "Yes. You know, I come from Nebraska." And she said, "Well, you're from here, the United States." She said, "You are fulfilling prophecy." And she said, "You're fulfilling the prophecy of the eagle and the condor." Meaning that all the indigenous peoples from the northern tip of the continent to the southern tip of the continent are coming back together. So she said, "You are fulfilling prophecy." So again, I kept that in my heart. And from that point on, I always said, I'm not looking at Mexicans. These are my relatives. They are all different tribes. They speak their languages just like we do up here. Nahuatl may be one such language. But it's much like, as they would say, English is here. You know, everybody speaks English. But Nahuatl is a beautiful language. So I've made attempts to speak Nahuatl over the years as well, at least to learn. But in this way too, you know, we're gonna have more coming up in the next 2 days, and with the water ceremony. I wanted to introduce my relative, but I think she left, our Ojibwe grandmother, great-grandmother Mary Lyons. She's going to be leading us in water ceremony on Thursday morning. And she comes from a little further north. And she is a Medewan woman, Medewan Kwe, as they say in Ojibwe. And again, to understand that relationship, I too became Medewan, because in the Omaha tribe, we had a society called the Omaha Shell Society. Washiska Avi, they have shells. This was my grandmother. So for me to relearn that way, in the midst of everything, I got my grandmother's way back and brought it back with me to my tribe and to this region. So great-grandmother Mary Lyons is very much a part of that. This connection between all of us, relationship, is sacred. That's what I want to leave you with. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Again, Vatite Uda, it's good you're here. Welcome to Omaha country. And let's continue going forth in relationship. Wiblaha, Ewide Wangide, all my relations.